The rain had been falling for 3 days straight when the black luxury car pulled up outside Sunrise Children's Home. 12-year-old Mei Lin watched from the window of the common room, her small fingers pressed against the cold glass. She had seen cars like this before. They always brought the same kind of people. Rich ones. Important ones. The kind who smiled for photographs and never came back. She turned away and went back to her corner, clutching the old violin case against her chest like a shield. Mei Lin had lived in this orphanage for 2 years now. But before that, she had moved through 4 different foster homes in just 4 years. Nobody kept her for long. The social workers always said the same things. She was too quiet, too distant, too strange. One family had sent her back after only 3 weeks because she refused to throw away her broken violin. They said it was junk. They said she was holding on to the past. But they did not understand. That violin was not junk. It was all she had left of her mother. The other children in the orphanage had learned to leave her alone. At first, they had tried to bully her, calling her names and hiding her things. But Mei Lin never cried. She never fought back. She just looked at them with those dark, steady eyes until they felt uncomfortable and walked away. Eventually, they decided she was not worth the trouble. She liked it that way. Being invisible was safer than being seen. The front doors of the orphanage opened, and Mei Lin heard voices in the hallway. The director, Mrs. Park, was speaking in that high, nervous tone she always used when donors visited. A man's voice responded, deep and impatient. Then a woman's voice, softer and kinder. A few minutes later, the doors to the common room swung open. Mrs. Park walked in first, her hands clasped together, her smile too wide. Behind her came a tall man, in an expensive coat. He had silver hair and sharp eyes that scanned the room like he was calculating the value of everything in it. His name was Richard Thornton, and he was the CEO of Harmony Music Corporation, one of the biggest music companies in the country. Mei Lin did not know this yet. She only knew that he looked like someone who was used to getting whatever he wanted. Next to him stood a woman with soft brown hair and kind eyes. She wore a simple cream-colored dress, and unlike her husband, she actually looked at the children. Not past them. Not through them. At them. Her name was Elena, and she had wanted to be a mother for as long as she could remember. But life had not given her that gift. After years of trying and failing, she had convinced her husband to visit this orphanage, not for publicity, not for tax benefits, but because she genuinely wanted to help. Richard, on the other hand, had only agreed because his PR team said it would look good for the company. The children gathered around the visitors like moths to a flame. They knew how this worked. Smile, big. Be polite. Maybe, just maybe, someone would pick them. Someone would take them home. But Mei Lin stayed in her corner, her back against the wall, her violin case resting on her lap. Elena noticed her immediately. While Richard shook hands with staff members and posed for photographs, Elena quietly walked across the room toward the girl in the corner. Mei Lin tensed, but did not move. She kept her eyes on the floor. Elena knelt down so they were at the same level. She did not rush. She did not push. She simply waited. After a long moment, Mei Lin looked up. Elena smiled gently. "Hello," she said. "My name is Elena. What's yours?" Mei Lin hesitated. "Mei Lin," she whispered. Elena glanced at the case in her arms. "That's a beautiful case. Do you play the violin?" Before Mei Lin could answer, a boy named Danny walked over. He was 13, loud, and always looking for attention. "Her?" he laughed. "She can't play anything. That violin is broken. It doesn't even have all the strings." A few other children giggled. Mei Lin's grip tightened on the case, but her face remained calm. She was used to this. Elena frowned at Danny, but before she could say anything, Richard walked over. He had finished with the photographs and was ready to leave. He checked his expensive watch and sighed. "Elena, we should get going. I have a meeting at 4. But Elena did not move. She was still looking at Mei Lin. "Richard, look at this girl. She has a violin." Richard barely glanced at her. So maybe she plays. Maybe she has talent. Danny laughed again. I told you, lady. That thing is broken. It only has 2 strings. Nobody can play a violin with 2 strings. Richard smirked. He was not a cruel man. Not really. But he was impatient and dismissive of things that did not immediately benefit him. To him, this was just another photo opportunity, another box to check. Tell you what, he said, his voice dripping with amusement. If this girl can actually play something on that broken violin, I'll adopt her myself. The room went very still. Mrs. Park let out a nervous laugh. Mr. Thornton, I'm sure you don't mean— Of course I don't mean it, Richard said, waving his hand. That's the point. It's impossible. Let's go, Elena. But Elena did not move. She was watching Mei Lin, and something in the girl's eyes had changed. There was a spark there. A quiet fire. Would you like to play for us, Mei Lin? Elena asked softly. You don't have to. Only if you want to. The other children snickered. Danny crossed his arms, waiting to see her fail. Mei Lin sat very still for a long moment. She thought about all the nights she had spent alone in the dark, teaching herself to play on those 2 remaining strings. She thought about her mother, who had held this same violin and filled their tiny apartment with music. She thought about all the people who had looked at her and seen nothing but a broken girl with a broken instrument. Slowly, she stood up. She set the case on the floor and opened it. Inside lay the violin. It was scratched and worn. The wood was faded. 2 of the strings were missing. It looked like something that belonged in a trash can, not in a concert hall. Danny laughed. See? I told you. It's garbage. Mei Lin did not respond. She lifted the violin carefully, like it was made of glass, and tucked it under her chin. She raised the bow, took a deep breath, and closed her eyes. Then she played. The first note cut through the room like a blade of light through darkness. It was pure. It was clear. It was impossibly beautiful. Then came the second note. And the third. With only 2 strings, Mei Lin played a melody that seemed to come from another world. It was sad and hopeful at the same time. It told a story of loss and longing, of a little girl who had lost everything but refused to give up. Elena's hand flew to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes. Mrs. Park stood frozen, her clipboard slipping from her fingers. The children who had laughed fell silent. Danny's smirk faded. He stared at Mei Lin like he was seeing her for the first time, and Richard Thornton, the man who had made the joke, the man who had dismissed her without a second thought, stood completely still. His face had gone pale. His hands trembled at his sides. He recognized that melody. He had heard it before, many years ago, played by a young woman who had once begged him for help. A woman he had turned away. A woman who had died alone. When the last note faded into silence, no one spoke. No one moved. Mei Lin lowered the violin and looked directly at Richard. My mother taught me that song, she said quietly. Before she went away, Richard's throat tightened. His heart pounded in his chest. For the first time in his life, he did not know what to say. The silence in the room lasted for what felt like hours. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The echo of Mei Lin's music still hung in the air like a ghost that refused to leave. Richard Thornton stood frozen in place. His expensive shoes felt nailed to the floor. His mind was racing, spinning backward through time to a memory he had buried deep and tried to forget. That melody. He knew that melody. He had heard it once before, in a small recording studio, played by a young woman with tears streaming down her face. Her name was Lian Chen. She had been one of the most gifted violinists of her generation. Critics called her a once-in-a-century talent. Her fingers moved across the strings like magic. And when she played, even the coldest hearts melted. Richard had signed her to his record label when she was only 22 years old. He had promised her fame. He had promised her the world. But he had not kept those promises. Elena was the first to break the silence. She rushed forward and knelt beside Mei Lin, her eyes wet with tears. That was beautiful, she whispered. That was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard. Mei Lin did not smile. She lowered the violin carefully, almost protectively, and held it against her chest. She was not used to compliments. She did not know how to respond to them. The other children stared at her with wide eyes. Danny, the boy who had mocked her, looked like he had seen a ghost. His mouth hung open, but no words came out. For once in his life, he had nothing to say. Mrs. Park finally recovered enough to speak. "Mei Lin," she said slowly. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Mei Lin looked down at the floor. "I taught myself," she said quietly. "At night, when everyone was sleeping." Elena shook her head in disbelief. "You taught yourself? On a violin with only 2 strings?" Mei Lin nodded. "But that song," Elena continued. "It was so complex, so emotional. Did someone teach you that melody?" Mei Lin's fingers tightened around the neck of the violin. For a moment, her calm mask slipped, and something painful flickered across her face. "My mother," she said. "She used to play it for me when I was little. Before she went away." Elena felt her heart break. She reached out and gently touched Mei Lin's shoulder. "I'm so sorry. Sweetheart, what happened to your mother?" Mei Lin did not answer. She just shook her head and looked away. Across the room, Richard had still not moved. His face was pale, almost gray. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides. Elena noticed and frowned. "Richard," she said. "Richard, are you all right?" He did not respond. Elena stood up and walked over to her husband. She had never seen him like this. In all their years of marriage, through business deals and boardroom battles, she had never seen him look so shaken. "Richard, what's wrong?" she asked, lowering her voice. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Richard swallowed hard. His throat felt like sandpaper. "That song," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know that song." Elena blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean I've heard it before, years ago." He turned to look at Mei Lin, who was carefully placing her violin back in its case. "A woman wrote that song, a violinist. She called it Echoes of Tomorrow. She played it for me once, in my studio, when she was begging me to help her." Elena stared at him. "Who was she?" Richard closed his eyes. The memory came flooding back, sharp and painful. It had been 12 years ago. Lian Chen had come to his office, desperate and afraid. She had been married to a man who controlled every part of her life. He managed her money, her schedule, her career, and when she tried to leave him, he threatened to destroy her. He said he would take everything, her reputation, her savings, her baby daughter. Lian had begged Richard for help. She needed money to escape. She needed protection. She needed someone powerful to stand by her side. But Richard had refused. He told her it was not his problem. He told her that personal drama was bad for business. He told her to figure it out on her own. And then he had his secretary escort her out of the building. 3 months later, Lian Chen was dead. The newspapers called it a car accident. A tragic loss for the music world. Richard had attended her memorial service, shook hands with important people, and gave a short speech about her talent. Then he went back to his life and tried to forget. He never thought about what happened to her daughter. Until now. "Richard." Elena's voice cut through his thoughts. "Richard, talk to me. Who was she?" He opened his eyes and looked at his wife. "Her name was Lian Chen," he said. "She was a violinist. One of the best I ever worked with. And I think..." He paused, his voice catching. "I think that little girl might be her daughter." Elena's eyes widened. "Are you sure?" "No," Richard admitted. "But that song. Lian wrote it herself. She never recorded it. She never performed it in public. She told me it was too personal. She said she only played it for the people she loved." They both turned to look at Mei Lin. The girl had finished packing her violin and was walking back to her corner. Alone. The other children parted to let her pass. Still too stunned to speak, Elena made a decision. She walked over to Mrs. Park and spoke quietly. I want to know everything about that girl. Her full name. Her background. How she ended up here. Everything. Mrs. Park nodded nervously. Of course. Mrs. Thornton. I'll pull her file immediately. 20 minutes later, Elena and Richard sat in Mrs. Park's small office, reading through a thin folder. The pages told a sad and familiar story. Mother deceased, father unknown, no living relatives, 6 years in the foster system, 4 failed placements. But it was the mother's name that made Richard's blood run cold. Lian Chen. He stared at the name until the letters blurred. His worst fear had been confirmed. The girl in the common room, the one he had mocked and dismissed, was the daughter of the woman he had abandoned 12 years ago. Elena looked at her husband. Richard, this is her. This is Lian's daughter. Richard could not speak. His hands were shaking. We have to help her, Elena said firmly. We have to do something. I know, Richard whispered. He thought about the joke he had made just an hour ago. If she plays, I'll adopt her. He had said it to be clever. He had said it because he never believed it could happen, but it had happened. And now he was faced with a choice. He could walk away, just like he did 12 years ago. He could write a check, pose for a few more photographs, and pretend he never learned the truth. He could go back to his comfortable life and forget about the girl with the broken violin. Or he could do what he should have done all those years ago. He could help. Elena reached over and took his hand. Whatever you're thinking, whatever happened in the past, this is a chance to make it right. Richard looked at his wife. He saw the hope in her eyes. The kindness that he had always admired but never truly understood. She wanted to be a mother. She had wanted it for so long, and now, in the strangest way possible, fate had placed a child in front of them. Not just any child. Lian's child. Richard stood up slowly. His legs felt weak, but his mind was made up. I need to talk to her, he said. I need to tell her the truth. Elena nodded. We'll do it together. Elena nodded. They walked out of the office and back toward the common room. Through the window, they could see Mei Lin sitting alone in her corner, her violin case clutched to her chest, staring out at the rain. She had no idea that her whole life was about to change, and neither did Richard. Richard did not sleep that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Elena slept peacefully beside him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lian Chen's face. He remembered the way she had looked at him 12 years ago, standing in his office with tears in her eyes, begging for help. He remembered the coldness in his own voice when he turned her away. And now her daughter was sitting alone in an orphanage, clutching a broken violin, waiting for someone to want her. The guilt felt like a stone sitting on his chest. By morning, Richard had made a decision. He needed to know everything. He needed to understand exactly what had happened to Lian after he refused to help her. So he called the best private investigator money could buy and gave him one simple instruction. Find out the truth. It took the investigator less than a week. He arrived at Richard's office on a Tuesday afternoon with a thick folder and a grim expression. Richard sat behind his desk, his hands folded, his jaw tight. Elena sat beside him. Holding his hand, the investigator opened the folder and began to speak. Lian Chen had married a man named Victor Huang when she was 20 years old. At first, the marriage seemed happy. Victor was charming and supportive. He helped manage her career and handled all her finances. But over time, his true nature revealed itself. He was controlling, possessive. He isolated Lian from her friends and family. He made all her decisions for her. And when she tried to push back, he threatened her. When Lian became pregnant, she thought things might change. She hoped that a baby would soften Victor, make him kinder. But it only made things worse. He became more paranoid, more demanding. He accused her of wanting to leave him. He said if she ever tried to take their daughter, he would make sure she never worked again. He would destroy her reputation. He would take the child and disappear. Lian was trapped. She tried to escape once. She went to Richard Thornton, the powerful CEO who had promised her the world when he signed her to his label. She thought he would help. She thought he would protect her. But Richard had refused. After that, Leanne had no one left to turn to. She stayed with Victor for another 3 months, trying to find another way out. And then, on a rainy night in October, her car went off a bridge. The police called it an accident. The roads were slippery. Visibility was poor. There were no witnesses, but the investigator had dug deeper. He had found old police reports, hospital records, interviews with people who knew Leanne. And he had found something troubling. In the weeks before her death, Leanne had told several friends that she was planning to leave Victor for good. She had been secretly saving money. She had found a lawyer who was willing to help her file for divorce and fight for custody. She was finally ready to escape. And then she died. Victor was never charged with anything. There was no evidence of foul play. But within a month of Leanne's death, he had emptied their bank accounts and vanished. He left their 2-year-old daughter behind like she was nothing. Mei Lin was placed in foster care. She bounced from home to home, unwanted and alone, carrying nothing but her mother's broken violin. The investigator closed the folder and looked at Richard. "That's everything I could find," he said. "I'm sorry." Richard sat in silence for a long moment. His face was pale. His hands trembled on the desk. Elena wiped tears from her eyes. "That poor girl," she whispered. "That poor, poor girl." Richard finally spoke. His voice was hoarse. "I could have stopped this. If I had helped Leanne when she asked, she might still be alive. Mei Lin might have grown up with a mother who loved her." Elena squeezed his hand. "You can't change the past, Richard. But you can change her future." Richard nodded slowly. She was right. He could not undo what he had done, but he could try to make it right. That weekend, Richard and Elena returned to Sunrise Children's Home. They brought paperwork. They brought lawyers. They brought a sincere offer to adopt Mei Lin and give her the life she deserved. Mrs. Park was thrilled. She ushered them into her office and pulled out the necessary forms. "This is wonderful news," she said, her voice bright. "Mei Lin is such a special girl. She deserves a loving family." But when they brought Mei Lin into the office to tell her the good news, things did not go as planned. The girl stood near the door, her violin case clutched against her chest as always. Her dark eyes moved from Richard to Elena to Mrs. Park. She did not smile. She did not speak. Elena stepped forward gently. "Mei Lin, we have something important to tell you. We want to adopt you. We want you to come live with us and be part of our family." Mei Lin did not react. Richard cleared his throat. "I know this is sudden, and I know you don't know us very well. But we want to give you a home. A real home. You'll have your own room, you can go to a good school, and you can keep playing the violin. We'll get you lessons, new instruments, whatever you need." Still, Mei Lin said nothing. Her face was like stone. Elena tried again. "Sweetheart, I know the past has been hard. I know you've been through things no child should ever go through. But we want to be there for you. We want to take care of you." Finally, Mei Lin spoke. Her voice was quiet but steady. "You don't want me." Elena blinked. "What? Of course we want you." Mei Lin shook her head slowly. "No. You didn't notice me until I played. You didn't care about me until you heard the music. You only want me because of my mother." The words hit Richard like a punch to the stomach. Mei Lin continued, her voice growing stronger. "I've been in this place for 2 years. Before that, I was in 4 different homes. Nobody wanted me. Nobody even looked at me. But then, I play one song, and suddenly, everyone cares." She looked directly at Richard, and her eyes were sharp. "You made a joke. You said if I could play, you would adopt me. You didn't mean it. You were laughing at me, just like everyone else." Richard opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. "I'm not a prize," Mei Lin said. "I'm not a trophy. I'm not something you can collect because you feel guilty about my mother." Elena gasped. "You know about your mother?" Mei Lin's jaw tightened. I know she was special. I know she died. And I know that people only cared about her because of her music. Just like they only care about me now because of mine. She stepped back toward the door. I don't want your adoption. I don't want your money. I don't want to be wanted just because I can play a broken violin. And with that, she turned and walked out of the office, leaving Richard and Elena standing in stunned silence. Mrs. Park looked horrified. I'm so sorry. I had no idea she would react this way. She's usually so quiet. But Richard was not listening. He was staring at the empty doorway, replaying her words in his mind. She was right. He had made a joke. He had laughed at her. He had only noticed her because of the music, because of the connection to Leanne. He had come here thinking he could write a check and fix everything, but it was not that simple. This girl had been hurt too many times to trust anyone. And Richard had already proven that he was exactly the kind of person who would let her down. Elena touched his arm. What do we do now? Richard took a deep breath. For the first time in his life, he did not have an easy answer. We don't give up, he said quietly. We show her that we mean it. Not with words, with actions. Elena nodded. Then that's what we'll do. They walked out of the office together, knowing that the hardest part was just beginning. Richard Thornton had built a billion-dollar company by being aggressive. He made quick decisions. He pushed hard. He never took no for an answer. That approach had made him rich and powerful, but it would not work with Mei Lin. So he did something he had never done before in his entire life. He slowed down. He waited. He let go of control. The first week after Mei Lin rejected them, Richard returned to the orphanage alone. He did not bring lawyers or paperwork. He did not bring gifts or promises. He simply walked into the common room and sat down in a chair near the window. Mei Lin was in her usual corner, her violin case on her lap. She looked at him once, then turned away. Richard did not approach her. He did not try to start a conversation. He just sat there, quietly, watching the rain fall outside, giving her space. After an hour, he stood up, nodded politely to Mrs. Park, and left. The next week, he came back. Same thing. He walked in, sat down in the same chair, and stayed for an hour. He brought a book with him this time, and read quietly. Mei Lin watched him from across the room, suspicious and confused, but he made no move toward her. He asked nothing of her. He just showed up. Week after week, Richard returned. Sometimes Elena came with him. Sometimes he came alone. They never pressured Mei Lin. They never asked her to change her mind. They simply existed in her world, quietly and consistently, proving that they were not going to disappear. The other children started to notice. They whispered among themselves, wondering why this rich man kept coming back for a girl who clearly did not want him. Danny, the boy who used to mock Mei Lin, even approached Richard one afternoon. Why do you keep coming here? Danny asked bluntly. She doesn't like you. She's never going to say yes. Richard looked at the boy calmly. Maybe not, he said. But I'm going to keep showing up anyway. Danny frowned. That's stupid. Richard smiled sadly. Maybe. But sometimes the right thing and the easy thing are not the same. Danny did not understand. He shrugged and walked away. But Mei Lin had heard every word. On the 5th week, something changed. Richard arrived as usual and took his seat by the window. But this time, after about 20 minutes, Mei Lin stood up. She walked slowly across the room, her violin case still pressed against her chest, and stopped a few feet away from him. Richard looked up but did not speak. He waited. Mei Lin stared at him for a long moment. Then she sat down in the chair next to his. They sat in silence for the rest of the hour. Neither of them said a word. But it was a start. The following week, Richard brought something with him. It was a photograph, old and slightly faded. It showed a young woman on a stage, holding a violin, her face glowing with joy. She was mid-performance, completely lost in the music. Richard set the photograph on the small table between them. Mei Lin's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes went wide. She reached out slowly and picked up the picture. her fingers trembling. "That's your mother," Richard said quietly. "That was taken during her first big concert. She was 23 years old. I was there that night. I had never heard anyone play like that before, or since. Until I heard you." Maylin did not take her eyes off the photograph. A single tear rolled down her cheek. Richard continued, his voice soft. "She was brilliant, Maylin. Not just talented, brilliant, and kind. She had this way of making everyone around her feel special. When she walked into a room, everything got brighter." Maylin finally spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I don't remember her face anymore. I try, but I can't see it." Richard's heart broke. "Then let me help you remember. I have more photographs. I have recordings of her performances. I have stories. So many stories. And I'll share all of them with you. If you'll let me." Maylin looked up at him. Her eyes were wet, but her gaze was steady. "Why?" "Because she deserved to be remembered," Richard said. "And because you deserve to know who she was." From that day forward, Richard brought something new each week. More photographs. Old concert programs. Newspaper clippings with glowing reviews. He brought a small portable speaker once and played a recording of Leanne performing at a charity gala. Maylin sat perfectly still, her eyes closed, listening to her mother's music fill the room. Elena came more often too. She did not talk about adoption anymore. Instead, she brought books and art supplies. She sat with Maylin and drew pictures together. She braided her hair when Maylin allowed it. She asked about her favorite foods, her favorite colors, the things she dreamed about. Slowly, carefully, walls began to come down. One rainy afternoon, about 3 months after their first meeting, Maylin asked the question Richard had been dreading. They were sitting by the window, looking at an old photograph of Leanne holding a baby in her arms. The baby was Maylin, only a few months old. "You knew my mother," Maylin said. It was not a question. Richard nodded. "Yes, she came to you for help, before she died." Richard's chest tightened. He had known this moment would come. He had prepared for it, rehearsed what he would say 100 times. But now that it was here, all his carefully planned words vanished. "Yes," he said. "She did." Maylin turned to look at him. Her eyes were calm but piercing. "Why didn't you help her?" Richard felt tears sting his eyes. He did not try to hide them. He did not try to make excuses. He owed this girl the truth. "Because I was a coward," he said, his voice breaking. "Because I cared more about my business than about people. Your mother came to me scared and desperate, and I turned her away. I told her it wasn't my problem. I told her to figure it out herself, and I have regretted it every single day since." Maylin did not respond. She just watched him, waiting. Richard took a shaky breath. "I can't change what I did. I can't bring her back. I can't undo the years you spent alone, bouncing from home to home with no one to care for you. If I could, I would give anything. Everything. But I can't." He reached over and gently took her hand. She did not pull away. "What I can do," Richard continued, "is be here now. Not because I owe your mother. Not because I feel guilty. But because you deserve a family. You deserve people who will show up for you, again and again, no matter what. And I want to be one of those people, if you'll let me." Maylin looked down at their hands. Her fingers were small and thin. His were large and rough. They did not match at all. But somehow, they fit. For a long time, she said nothing. The rain tapped against the window. The old photograph sat between them. A bridge between past and present. Then, slowly, Maylin leaned over and rested her head against Richard's shoulder. She did not say yes. She did not say anything at all. But for the first time in 6 years, she let someone hold her while she cried. And Richard Thornton, the man who had spent his whole life chasing power and success, finally understood what truly mattered. He held her gently and let his own tears fall. Outside, the rain continued to pour. But inside that small room, something beautiful was beginning to grow. The adoption papers were signed on a bright spring morning, exactly 1 week before Mei Lin's 13th birthday. She sat between Richard and Elena in a small courtroom, wearing a blue dress that Elena had picked out for her. It was the first new dress she had owned in years. The judge was a kind woman with silver hair and warm eyes. She looked over the documents carefully, asked a few questions, and then smiled at Mei Lin. "Young lady," she said, "do you understand what is happening today?" Mei Lin nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. And is this what you want? Do you want Richard and Elena Thornton to become your legal parents?" Mei Lin glanced at Richard, then at Elena. 6 months ago, she would have said no without hesitation. She would have pushed them away like she pushed everyone else. But things were different now. She was different. "Yes," she said quietly. "This is what I want." The judge nodded and signed the final paper. "Then, by the power vested in me, I declare that Mei Lin is now officially and legally the daughter of Richard and Elena Thornton. Congratulations to your new family." Elena burst into tears. She wrapped her arms around Mei Lin and held her tight, whispering "thank you" over and over again. Richard put his arms around both of them, his own eyes wet. For the first time in 6 years, Mei Lin had a family. They drove home together in Richard's car. But it was not the cold, empty mansion that Mei Lin had expected. Over the past few months, Elena had transformed one of the spare rooms into a bedroom just for her. The walls were painted a soft lavender, her favorite color. There were bookshelves filled with books about music and adventure. A comfortable bed sat by the window, piled with soft pillows. And in the corner, on a special stand, was a brand new violin. Mei Lin walked through the room slowly, touching everything like she was afraid it might disappear. "This is mine?" she asked. Elena smiled. "All yours. Every bit of it." Mei Lin sat on the edge of the bed and looked around. She did not know what to say. She had never had a room of her own before. She had never had anything that was truly hers, except for her mother's broken violin. Richard cleared his throat. "There's one more thing. But it's not ready yet. It will be here on your birthday." Mei Lin looked at him curiously. "What is it?" Richard smiled mysteriously. "You'll see." The week passed quickly. Mei Lin started to settle into her new life. She ate breakfast with Richard and Elena every morning. She explored the big house and its garden. She played her new violin for hours each day, filling the rooms with music. For the first time in as long as she could remember, she felt safe. But she still kept her mother's old violin close. She placed it on a shelf in her room, where she could see it every night before she fell asleep. It was broken and worn, missing 2 strings. But it was still precious to her. It always would be. On the morning of her 13th birthday, Mei Lin woke up to the smell of pancakes. She went downstairs and found Elena in the kitchen, flipping pancakes shaped like musical notes. Richard sat at the table with a cup of coffee and a suspicious smile on his face. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," Elena said, pulling her into a hug. "Happy birthday," Richard echoed. "How does it feel to be a teenager?" Mei Lin shrugged, but she was smiling. "The same, I guess." After breakfast, Richard stood up. "All right, it's time for your present." He led her into the living room, where a large case sat on the coffee table. It was made of dark, polished wood, far nicer than anything Mei Lin had ever seen. Her heart began to beat faster. "Go ahead," Elena said softly. "Open it." Mei Lin stepped forward and unlatched the case. She lifted the lid slowly. Inside, resting on a bed of red velvet, was a violin. But not just any violin. This one was old, with a rich golden-brown color that seemed to glow in the morning light. The wood was smooth and warm to the touch. All 4 strings were perfectly in place, and carved into the back, in tiny delicate letters, was a name, Lian Chen. Mei Lin stopped breathing. "That was your mother's violin," Richard said quietly. "Her very first one. She bought it when she was 16 years old. With money she saved from working at a bakery after school. She used it for every performance until she could afford a professional instrument. After she passed, it disappeared. I spent the last 4 months tracking it down." Mei Lin's hands were shaking. She lifted the violin out of the case and held it like it was the most fragile thing in the world. Tears streamed down her face. I had it restored, Richard continued. New strings, new bridge, everything fixed and polished. But the wood, the soul of it, that's still hers. That's still your mother's. Maylin could not speak. She pressed the violin against her chest and cried. Elena moved to her side and held her gently. Richard placed his hand on her shoulder. They stayed like that for a long time. That evening, Richard and Elena hosted a small gathering to celebrate. There were no reporters, no cameras, no business associates. Just a few close friends and the staff from Sunrise Children's Home. Mrs. Park came, along with a few of the children Maylin had grown up with. Even Danny was there, awkwardly standing in the corner with a wrapped gift in his hands. After dinner, Elena stood up and raised her glass. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. This has been the most incredible year of our lives. We came to that orphanage looking for a way to give back, and instead, we found something we didn't even know we were missing. We found our daughter. She looked at Maylin with tears in her eyes. Maylin, you have brought more joy into this house than I ever thought possible. We love you. We are so proud of you, and we are so grateful that you gave us a chance. Everyone clapped. Maylin's cheeks turned red, but she was smiling. Then Richard spoke. Maylin, would you play something for us? It would mean the world. Maylin hesitated. She looked at the violin case sitting beside her chair. Her mother's violin. She had not played it yet. She had been afraid to. It felt too important, too sacred. But now, surrounded by people who loved her, she felt ready. She opened the case and lifted the violin. She tucked it under her chin, raised the bow, and closed her eyes. But she did not play Echoes of Tomorrow. That song belonged to her mother. It was a song about longing, about searching for something just out of reach. Instead, Maylin played something new, something she had written herself, during all those lonely nights in the orphanage, dreaming of a life she thought she would never have. She called it Home. The melody was soft at first, gentle like a whisper. Then it grew stronger, richer, filled with hope and warmth. It spoke of dark days and empty rooms, of silence and loneliness, but it also spoke of light breaking through clouds, of hands reaching out, of doors finally opening. It was the sound of a girl who had been lost, finally finding where she belonged. When the last note faded, the room was silent. Elena was crying. Mrs. Park was crying. Even Danny wiped his eyes and pretended he had something stuck in them. Richard Thornton sat in his chair, tears rolling freely down his face. He did not try to hide them. He did not care who saw. He had spent his whole life building an empire. He had earned more money than he could ever spend. He had power, influence, respect, but none of it compared to this moment. He looked at Maylin, this brave, brilliant girl who had walked into his life with a broken violin and changed everything. He had come to that orphanage as a joke. He was leaving as a father. And for the first time in his life, Richard Thornton understood what it truly meant to be rich.